Visiting, you're welcome to be. We're glad to have you here. Welcome for being with us here. And we've been studying from the book of John in our class. And so we're in John 18 as we're working our way through, and we'll get into that in just a second. I guess I'll close this door here. So as we get started, we're going to ask Rush Baker, if he would. Nice voice from the back to lead us into prayer as we get started.
Please bow. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for your greatness and your Son's selfless sacrifice. We thank you for this yet another day of worship. We all get together and worship and praise you and learn about you and be together as Christians. We also are thankful for David, the time he puts in these classes. We ask that you speak through him, reach us, and hopefully allow us to take it with us into what we learn. Please give us for all of our sins. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Okay. Obviously, when you get into a study of John, you're looking at the life of Christ. But historically speaking, John writes in a different era of time than Jesus actually was performing all these things we're reading. And so, keeping that in mind, John is also most likely, of course we don't have dates on the manuscripts, but most likely the latest of the four Gospels, coming along at a time where the church has been around for a long time and is starting to battle a lot of different things and some false teaching, some beliefs that Jesus never really came in the flesh, and introducing a lot of unusual ideas. So as John will wrap up his epistle, he's writing this that people would believe and believe the things that he's mentioned. And some of the things that we noticed as we've been working our way through John was that his gospel has a lot of things that aren't in the other three gospels. Sometimes they're called the synoptics because they parallel one another as far as their chronology and the direction, how they approach the view of Jesus. And John's a little different until you get to this part here. And I was flipping through an old commentary I had sometime on the Gospel of John, and the author mentions that up to this point, his approach to looking at Jesus and the things that Jesus did and adding things that the others did was so unique that they didn't see it like a parallel, and that's why it's not called a synoptic. Until to this point. And then there seems to be a change of approach in how he's handling this last few hours of Jesus' life and his death and his resurrection. It's a different approach to that until chapter 21, I would throw in there. So anyway, let's read first 11 verses, and then we're going to talk about a variety of different things here. So, Tom, just caught you throwing a piece of gum in your mouth. Can you still read? All right. We're in chapter 18, verses 1 through 11.
After saying these things, Jesus crossed the Jordan Valley and with his disciples entered a grove of olive trees. Judas, the betrayer, knew this place because Jesus had often gone there with his disciples. The leading priests and Pharisees had given Judas a contingent of Roman soldiers and temple guards to accompany him.
Sorry to give you such a lengthy passage. It's hard to figure out where to break it. And verse by verse would be one way, as we'll go back and cover some details about it. But it just so fits together with a very quick synopsis. It probably happened thinking about how long does it take for the group when they arrive to talk to Jesus, to go through these events and all this. Probably the time that we did in reading this was about the time that elapsed in the whole operation. They came up, there they were, starting at that point. And the discussion, very quick discussion with Jesus, action of Peter, and then Jesus leaving. It really didn't take that much time. There's a movie that came out some time ago called The Passion. And best I can recall, it kind of starts right at this moment as Jesus is in the garden with 11 of his apostles. And Judas is off, of course, as we've read here, bringing a detachment of troops with him. But in this movie, I saw something I hadn't really thought about before, just the background of the circumstances. They're in the dark, in a garden, and the Kidron Valley is just a valley between the Mount of Olives where Jesus is at and Jerusalem. If you're sitting in one location, you can look off and see it. It's just a few hundred yards away. And so you're talking 4, 5, 6 football fields length maybe, just a valley down and up, and there's the wall of Jerusalem. And Jesus was right across there up on that ridge. And so you're thinking about a detachment of troops that are coming down through there and all. It's so visual to see the fire burning at night as they're coming. And so the movie portrays Peter particularly a lot different than the program The Chosen, if you've seen any of those, where he's a much smarter, conniving type fellow. This portrayal that Mel Gibson gave, whoever put the guy in, is a pretty rugged guy. And it's somebody, if you're small like me and you got in trouble, you want him to be standing next to you, because he just presents with his size a good. So Peter's sitting there looking, and he looks up and he sees, along with the other apostles in this dark area, a detachment of troops. Now you can't see them all because it's dark, but what you see are the torches they're bringing, marching up like soldiers would be marching through there. And instantly you look over, and what a great caption is that the nose on Peter, and who portrayed it, flared like he was in anger, watching very carefully. You couldn't have missed that at night if you're thinking about being with 11 people in an area that normally is dark, obviously no flashlights or anything like that to light up anything, and it's just pitch black, or maybe lit by a bright moon, who knows. But when you see flames coming your way, and not one like a small group of people, but bunches of them, and you're hearing noise as they get closer, you can't help but think something's going to happen. And so these guys that are used to, in their mind, protecting Jesus, or at least standing with him, are incensed. There's danger. And Jesus has always been walking on the edge or on the other side as far as bucking the traditions that the Pharisees, etc., had put in. It wasn't that it were God's traditions. And so here, with all of this going on, is the setting of what's happening here. And so he's there with them. Verse 2 mentions that Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place, because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. Kind of neat and nostalgic when you're thinking about it. You're up on a hillside and you're looking down across the valley, and you're looking at the temple, as it were. And so a neat place to contemplate. You look over this, if it's lit up at night with stars, the sky and things like that, or sunshine in the day, and you're looking at God's temple. And who on earth could ever visualize what was really happening inside that temple? In the dwelling place, the Holy of Holies, and had, with his background, understood much more than we could ever imagine even now. But if anybody back in that day, what that represented and how his Father dwelled in that temple at that time. So it's kind of incredible as you look there and you're imagining the majesty and the power of God, and you're looking at all this. And I don't know if the 11 apostles, 12 counting Judas, always hung out together, but I find it unusual that Jesus often met with his apostles at this place. And John doesn't mention he was there, but he doesn't mention what they might have been thinking. Think about this. Why Judas wasn't there? Where's Judas? You know, you sit down, where's the, somebody's missed me. And start counting names. Oh, Judas. Again, this is strange. He's been with us and been not. And he got up and left during the supper. What's going on? And so in the midst of all of this, you can't know because the Bible doesn't tell us. But these things have got to be passing through their minds about why all this is going on, what's going on. And then verse 3, Judas having received, watch the definitions here, a detachment of troops. Not a soldier, might have pictured something like that. A detachment of troops. Pause right here. Anybody have a rough idea, a guesstimate, I guess, opinion of what would entail or what would not entail a detachment of troops? Think.
A cohort is about 600.
Oh, goodness. There's a peg for a number.
Some of the translations do list this as a cohort.
Really?
Yeah.
I doubt there was 600, but that's just because I never thought of that many before.
The Legion is 10 times more than a cohort.
Okay.
That's more information.
Right. No, it's good. It gives us some ideas to think on. So a detachment's a section of a group. A centurion, for instance, was in charge of 100 soldiers, and he's going to send off a detachment. And when you know, having a little military background, I know we ran some unusual maneuvers in Vietnam, and it would pull out of our company a group of people, and usually about 8 or 10. And they weren't selected because they're the best. It's just either one's near by hand, or if somebody said, I'll go with you, and they did. And some said, no thanks, I'll stay. But they would send them off for a particular maneuver, and sometimes for a night or two by themselves.
These are Jewish troops, aren't they?
Jewish troops.
Yeah,
That's why he has the power. Right, not Roman troops. Although that did say, your translation didn't say Roman troops. I picked up on that, thought, didn't notice that.
It said Roman soldiers.
Roman soldiers. But I don't think it doesn't mention that in the original. Most of our translations don't have that. So I'm thinking either we've got a very unusual manuscript that was translated from, or the guy just kind of flavored it with his opinion. It must have been not only soldiers, that's what a troop of guys would be, but it would be Roman. But I don't think there's a manuscript that really has that. Speaking just off the top of my head. I'm not a Greek scholar.
And mine also says temple guards.
Temple guards. Now that fits because it talks about officers from the chief priests. Whether you are of Jewish background for their thing, or you're a Roman soldier, when you ask for security, we'll call it that way, to accompany you, and the temple, by the way, did have guards. And I don't think security or whatever would be someone that was a couple scruffy guys that carried candles and long robes and looked holy and whatever. Now, the Pharisees wanted to have the garments, but what they carried with them, kind of like petite little politician that goes along and he's got 6 security people around him, to either talking in their sleeves or doing whatever, and communicating, and they're not scrawny little guys. And so a detachment of troops, even from the Jews, I would imagine, are rough and buff soldier guys, under the direction of the Pharisees or whoever's leading and directing it. And Judas at that point he's more like a compass. He's not really doing anything more except pointing them the right direction to get to Jesus at night. And Jesus will mention that. But you're looking at a detachment of troops, officers from the chief priests and Pharisees. How long does it take for us to put together such a variety of characters in our day and time? If you're looking to go do something of similar nature and you're wanting to get religious leaders and help from the government or whatever. I mean, it's not like a quick phone call in our way. And I'm wondering how long it took for Judas or whoever was putting this together, probably led by the Pharisees, but nonetheless, putting all this together. The troop they've got, so they grab them, but then they've got to get this, and they can't send text or call anybody, so they got to go to their homes and tell them, hey, we're getting ready, this is the time, this is the night, we've got everybody put together, Judas has got his money and he's leading us, let's go. And so it took some period of time to put this group, big group, together. And as they're trotting through, and I'm sure there's probably a pathway even back then, to lead down, to go straight up to where that's at. And so, but they're filling the path, if there is such a thing that's real wide, because it's such a large group of people. Had you ever thought about that? Or did you more or less think originally that there was Judas and one extra guy who wore this unusual robe and maybe a couple of his friends, and that was it? And I'm thinking, with all that's listed here, and it doesn't mention all of the Pharisees, but just some of them in that group, and some from the officers of the chief priest. Rush, go ahead. A little bit of a political background.
I don't know if you're too pedantic, but there's Roman law on which much of our many foundational concepts that we hold today are based. I'm just curious, would Roman law allow these priests to run around and with guards, weapons, and come into quote unquote private property, like what's going on, or was there some kind of Roman blessing to this, or do we know?
We don't know particularly. Let me just jump over here for a second. This is from the commentary I was looking through back however long ago I got it, I don't remember now. Going back over it though this weekend, and I was noticing something of this whole thing about the Roman law and all of these things. I've got to find this one little section. I was going to bring it up later. Here we go. This is why Jesus is on the trial with Annas, who's called the high priest, although he's really the father-in-law of the high priest. And the author here calls him high priest emeritus, like he'd been some time ago, and then he has sons, and then the fifth in the lineage shows up as being Caiaphas, who'll be mentioned. But first of all, you got to go to the father-in-law, because he really still runs the show. He's not high priest this year, but he's come down through the line. We'll get to his son in a minute, but it says that the trial before Annas took place at his private lodging. Just think about it. He's not in charge, so he's not at the office. And Caiaphas may or may not have participated in that. Annas' father-in-law of Caiaphas had been high priest between 7 to 14 years, and following at intervals, 5 of his sons and his sons-in-law held the office. He wielded a powerful influence and was regarded as high priest emeritus, as I mentioned. Now, as you're moving through here, the point of transition from Annas to Caiaphas, which most of our synoptics pick up with Jesus being led off to Caiaphas, but there was a stopover before that time. The point of transition from the house of Annas to the presence of Caiaphas has been disputed by different scholars. Maybe you've never even thought about moving from point A to point B, but there's logistics involved, and you're going through here and you're carrying this group of people and figuring out the path, etc. Let's see here, skipping on down. Okay. The trial then, after that, moves to Pilate. And we're aware of that from the Synoptics and John. But this trial is given more space in John than any other of the one Synoptics, in spite of certain omissions that he did from other narratives. So he's listing all that. It's John's portrayal of this incident is designed to bring the personalities of Pilate and Jesus into a sharp relief, as narrated in the judicial aspect. I'm going to answer your question here. I'm not giving you a long background of where we're headed here. And his question was, if you forgot, was this politically, or is this just, how are they getting out there with this number of people? And do they have some kind of clout with the people? And if not, are they operating outside of the law? As narrated with judicial aspects, the character of Pilate became more important, except in the trial of Jesus Christ. The first impression is that Pilate was reluctant. I'm getting to what's mentioned down the road here. But as he deals with this whole thing, he said, the third aspect he's going through this is that there was a readiness on Pilate's part to hear Jesus. Now remember, this is in the middle of the night. This is a Roman official, and we've gone through Annas to Caiaphas, and now we're looking at Pilate. And Tenney's comment is, as he's talking with them, it's like, how did this government official all of a sudden become called pretty much early in the morning or middle of the night to sat in front of people here? How did all of this transition, if, in fact, he hadn't already been notified the day before at least? You don't just walk into Pilate's place and just say, hey, push the doorbell, and he comes down in his house coat and says, let me switch into my robe and I'll join you. There's a whole lot that's gone on, and Tenney's drawing out the fact that hours have been taking place before he even got there. And so therefore, Pilate had advance notice about what they're about to do, full permission to take the troops and go do this, whether it was necessarily outside of what their government or political or religious laws allowed, because sometimes they gave the Jewish people extra credence in certain things. They get to take care of their own laws, and the discussion from Pilate will mention that. It'll bring out that he's your people. You go judge him by your law. So, I mean, they did have that freedom to maneuver about, but in this case, it's obvious that although we don't see it mentioned by John, if you're considering the whole thing transitioning, took hours of time, and to put together all of those people and do all that meant government approval. And when you're throwing in troops, it's something like size makes the power and makes the laws. You do what you want. And so maybe a little bit of both in that. That was a great deviation, wasn't it? I spent about 5 minutes going over nothing. Anyway, so yes, the officers are there. They are from the religious background as a group of people. But I'm just trying to capture the movement that's going on. And obviously, as Rush is bringing up here, is that this is not something secretive. I mean, one little person can slip in and out with a flashlight if they had them back then. But to move through an area with such a crowd of people and torches and whatever is an unusually different thing. Now, so we'll get down to verse 4. Jesus, therefore, knowing all things. We talked about that phrase. I want to come back to it here again. Knowing all things that would come upon him, went forward and said, whom are you seeking? Now, John's already mentioned in chapter 10 about Jesus surrendering his life. And he said, I lay it down. No one takes it from me. He was painting what, as best as words could, a picture for the apostles to visualize that would be happening very soon. I'm laying my life down. No one takes it. Peter missed that picture, and that's why he pulls the sword out. They're not taking Jesus. Well, they weren't taking Jesus. This is a complete surrender. They come with this massive group of power, and when they do, he steps in front like, I'm in charge here. And it's got to have blown their minds. And maybe at that point, they were a little scared to ask. Darkness of night, torches, not really that great. No spotlight, no halo over Jesus. Had to know him among other people. But he's just one of 11 other guys, and there's some force in all this. But he wants to totally defuse what could very quickly happen, and with Peter's situation, was about to. And so he steps in front, because he knew, knowing all things, what was about to happen, why they were there, knew the hearts of the individuals, the problems they have at home, and any number of different things. He knew all that. but he's in charge. And with that question, as I've mentioned a few times, anytime God or Jesus asks a question, it's not to gain information he doesn't already know, but it's to highlight something. And so he says, who are you seeking? They're kind of looking around like, this is the guy. But Jesus knows what they're thinking, and he's putting himself out there. He's not hiding behind his guys. I don't know who was in the back row, or they're just 11 guys side by side, but as this detachment comes up, I imagine they're kind of pushing Jesus toward the back, expecting something to happen because of him. So Jesus puts himself out front. Isn't it amazing? He's protecting his apostles, as you'll see in here. So Jesus of Nazareth, they said, and he said, I am he. And Judas, who betrayed him, also stood with him. Others mentioned he came up and gave Jesus a kiss, and there's a comment from Jesus about that. Now, but when he said all of that, I am he, it says, they drew back and fell on the ground. Now, I'm supposing by this time they're crowded around each other and they're carrying torches. Fire burns things. It's not like flashlights. And so if somebody in the front with a lantern out here and a torch over there, a variety of different things, all of a sudden starts stumbling, it's like, watch the fire. We're all crowded together. And so it's not like there's some miraculous power that happens here. I started just to ask the question, but it's just as they're backing up some because they didn't expect him to step right up there. They expected a scuffle. They have soldiers to do all this. It just shocked them. Once again, Jesus rendering himself, surrendering, and defusing the situation. What was it, an old program that came out years ago called F-Troop? Any of y'all seen that? It's got the Western guys that if they stood in ranks together, they'd trip over one another. We just envision this in the dark, you know. And so as you're looking at that, back in F-Troop, you used to laugh about it. And I wonder if it got a chuckle from a few of the apostles. And you call these guys soldiers, you know. They fell over on the ground. They can't even stand up together. I don't know if it was really comical, but I'm just trying to look at different slants on what happened here. Unusual, to say the least. So Jesus answered again, I've told you that I'm he. I'm right here. If you're seeking me, let them go. And I'm right here. Handcuff me, do whatever. Let these guys go. He didn't need to have a scuffle break out and lose 2 or 3 of his apostles before the real work ever got started. And it would have happened with soldiers up there. Tough guys, you know. Whenever somebody gets threatened, tough guys. I'll stand. I'll volunteer. I'll do it, you know. And these were tough guys, especially for Jesus. Verse 9 says, he said that it might be fulfilled which he spoke, of those whom you gave me, I have lost none. This is a physical response right now. Nothing more than he didn't lose them. And, you know, there was a time when the apostles wanted to call down lightning and thunder on some city that didn't respond to Jesus the way they should have. And so you can imagine, put these guys together like any other group of guys. Some are younger, some are older, and they're always competing with one another. I would think, at least in some way, being the tough guys and thinking they're going to be in charge in this kingdom. And maybe they're out practicing their sword fighting, etc., on the sidelines. Totally clueless about what kingdom has to do with, but they're getting ready to be in charge of the kingdom, you know, as men would probably think somewhat. I know I'm stretching this out a bit here, but I just want you to see it's not unusual when you get to verse 10. Peter pulls out the sword, 2 of them, whoever had swords still, drew it out, struck the high priest's servant. And it's interesting how specific it gets. Cuts off his right ear. Like, after this event happened, way before John wrote about it and John was there to see it. This guy Malchus is healed in front of all 11 apostles. And when Peter starts in, we'll talk about the discussion of how he cuts the ear off, etc. But this putting the ear back in front of the apostles who are ready to stand for Jesus, again, defuses the situation. Malchus, who's screaming and yelling to start with, all of a sudden starts feeling his ears back in place, and he can't figure out what happened. He looks down, he's got blood on his hand, and it's like, really? But it's here. Am I imagining this? But he goes home and talks about this, because there's nothing more life-changing than standing before a pistol pointed in your face, and the guy cocks it back and pulls the trigger, and it goes click. And you go, This is what happened with Malchus. This guy was aiming, not for the, let's see if I can hit the right ear. This is a soldier, at least probably with some kind of helmets and stuff. And I'm catching. Let me just stop. How do you envision getting the right ear cut off with a sword? How did he go at this? He's coming at it like this, probably. Well, whichever. But as you're looking at this, and it's coming down toward a possible helmet, and you do this, the sword comes down and goes cling, and it gets what's sticking out, the ear. Because you can actually be a soldier without the ear. It's kind of hard to hear the commands, but nonetheless, you can function somewhat. And so the helmet saved the head, but the ear was sticking out. Barbara? In the book of John. Yes. I agree, and I'm not sure about the exact number, but it's a large number. It could have even been more than that. I don't know, but it definitely has that. And in his epistles too, John also wants that they can know. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
You know, David, one thing that I was just sitting here thinking about. Jesus had a large following of the common people.
Right. At some points along the way. Sometimes they left him.
Even though probably Judas told this contingent of folks that there's 11 of them, these soldiers thought, yes, but how many people are there with him?
Very true. I never pondered that.
How many civilians are there with him?
Right. Just the regular disciples besides the apostles. The Bible does seem to imply that it was just the 11 that were there at that time.
But I'm just saying,
But
the reason they sent probably such a large contingency of soldiers was they were anticipating that
the possible that he was up there with more than his 11. Very good point. And I don't know that it was 100, but it wasn't 3 or 4, like I guess some paintings and whatever you've seen in Lifetime picture. Just grasp what's going on. There could be a major scuffle, except Jesus, knowing all things, knew what he had to do, so that didn't happen. And so that's part of what was going on. And we started with this knowing all things back last week or so, because it's mentioned a few times toward the end of John. And so as you're looking at what all he knows, it's mentioned in chapter 17, which is just his previous chapter. And that was as he's getting ready to be taken off. He knows all things. And chapter 13 mentions that when he's about to wash his apostles' feet. And it says, strangely enough, it inserts it, or knowing all things, and that he'd be leaving soon, and then he washed the feet. Pat.
In the 11th chapter, which we studied before, verses 45 through 50, following Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead, some of those that saw it went to Caiaphas and told him what was going on.
Save the many.
So he has some idea of what is taking place. And, I'm kind of in agreement with Rush here that the Romans, and you pointed out, the Romans did not allow insurrection and civil unrest.
Right.
I mean, boy, that would get you in trouble real quickly with it. There probably was a buildup of people that are involved in this, that are going with these Jewish religious leaders, and anticipating that there may be some great unrest, and they're going to go prepared. They're not going to allow this thing
Okay.
to get out of hand and create just total chaos.
I never thought about it to a greater extent like that they certainly didn't want a breakout all over Jerusalem. So they're going to call it right there. If they were that astute in that potential, they could have had that. Now, watching political actions today, I'm not sure how keen everybody is on everything going on, but somebody knows some things. So that could have very well. They are very careful in how they ran things and rather straight and hard, but it kept everything in line.
Well, all this arrangement was done under the table.
Yeah, well, probably at least part of it.
The Pharisees had already lined all this up.
Yeah, oh yes,
When we tell you we're ready to go, then you go with it.
right. It was done way ahead of time, excuse me. Okay. All right, so back to the question about cutting off the right ear. So one says he comes down like this, and Malchus goes, got that much time to move, but it's still coming close, and it takes off the ear. Or the other one is where he picks his sword up and he's swinging like this, and the guy goes to try to dodge it. And once again, the right ear gets scraped off. Now, Peter was aiming for the head. The guy moved. And that's, I don't think he was trying to perform surgery. And say, see, be careful, I'll do more next time. It was an action to kill. And Jesus puts him to task and now defuses his guys. Peter's ready to fight to the death, but if you can't fight, then what are you supposed to do? Except watch Jesus walk away, which is what he told them many times that was going to happen. And one of the apostles disagreed with him. Who would that have been? Peter. Lord, but you're going to go to town and die. I'll stand and get behind me, Satan, is that phrase that fits right there that Jesus used. So Peter's still missing it. You know, he was trying to keep Jesus from going to Jerusalem. And then he got there. Then they're off in the valley. They're doing good. And then all of a sudden, this detachment of troops coming up. And Peter's greatest fear, and the others too, my master's in danger. And so Jesus disarms Peter. Shall I not drink the cup which my Father has given me? Knowing all things, he knew this was happening, and he's going to go ahead and do what he's supposed to do. Not always easy, is it? So after all of this, he diffuses one side, then Peter and all this, and he stands back up. Now, John doesn't go into detail, but he's probably looking at the troops going, well, he's put his guys in their place, let's go. And he keeps them out of the loop as far as being arrested. So the detachment of troops and the captain and the officers, the Jews, arrested Jesus and bound him, verse 12. And they led him away to Annas first, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest, and as Pat mentioned a while ago, now it was Caiaphas who had advised the Jews that it was expedient that one man should die for the people. Caiaphas didn't know the ins and outs of that. He was thinking about trying to kill Lazarus again because he's back to life and we've got to do something because everybody's coming to see him. He's the biggest show in any town. And people want to sit down and ask him questions of what was it like to be alive again. And it was too much faith being grown out of that. So they were ready to kill him like that was going to, could Jesus not raise him another time? Yes. But they're set to do that he dies, that the rest of the nation would be at rest again. So that's probably what Caiaphas is thinking but doesn't realize that God is speaking through him about his son. Does that make sense? You got to agree because the bell's ringing here, so. All right. Verse 15. Wow, we don't have time to cover this. We'll jump into it. And Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. Whoa, nobody else mentioned that in the other Gospels. John does. John doesn't brag, but whenever he talks about, and so was another disciple, the disciple whom Jesus loved, he's talking about, not me, but John's pointing to himself. So John's along with him. Now the disciple was known to the high priest, the John in other words. And he went to Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. Peter stood at the door outside. So you imagine this side wall, whatever, and he's there at the door. Then the other disciple, John now, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to her who kept the door and brought Peter in. Peter never got in had John not got him in. Now it ends up getting Peter in trouble here, and you start right with that. But John's there, and so now Peter's in there too. Verse 17, then the servant girl who kept the door said to Peter, as visualize he's walking in, you are not one of this man's disciples also, aren't you? I am not, he says. Now the servants and the officers who'd made fire of coals stood there, for it was cold, and they warmed themselves. And Peter stood with them and warmed himself. There's a lot, I guess, lessons preached on standing too close to the fire, warming yourself alongside of the enemy. And I think John had to have been emphasizing that at least to some degree. Peter is over there warming himself. John is writing about it from a different location. Now, is John scared to be as close to the apostles, and Peter maybe is bigger and he doesn't worry about it as much, close to the soldiers? Maybe. Or maybe they don't recognize him as the one that was with Jesus. And so, of course, someone's asking that. But Peter's warming himself in a location where he shouldn't be that close, even if he's really cold, in fact. Wrap up with this thought. When Jesus is tempted by Satan, and the first temptation, or three, the first one that comes along, turn this stone into bread. I, as a younger Christian, still older, ponder, there didn't seem to be any sin in changing a stone to bread. If he wants to, and he's hungry, he's done this, he could. But I wonder if it's kind of like Satan's just open the door a little bit to let me in. Just think about listening to me, even though it doesn't really look that bad, because I've got some other things I want you to do, but first I have to get a yes right here. It doesn't seem that bad. Maybe you've thought about that. And so this whole thing of temptations, and here comes Peter. Well, it doesn't look bad standing alongside the soldiers, but he gets himself in a situation where he doesn't want to say he's with Jesus, because he's standing right next to the guys that at least were somewhat involved in making sure that Jesus was brought in. Careful where you stand. Okay, we'll stop right there. Let's have a prayer. Father, we thank you. Thank you because you've given us your word, and which tells us about Jesus and his important things that he did. Thank you for him being our Savior. Please be with us. We need you, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.